Self-disclosure is certainly a uniquely human phenomenon. And so this is the ability to share personal things about yourself with someone else. And people really vary on that, right? Um, so we're going to look at some interesting research here, but first I want you to be familiar with the reciprocity norm in self-disclosure, because when you look at this and it's being done well, and normally, you might say, this is generally what we see, is that it's a beautifully, exquisitely choreographed dance, back and forth, back and forth. So if you share something just a little bit personal with somebody else, they have a tendency to then share something just a little bit personal about themselves. And later on, now if that happens, later on, you're more likely to share something that's just a little more personal, and vice versa, and vice versa, and vice versa, and so on and so forth. And so then we've got this dance going on. Of course, that can get shut down if the person you share something a little bit personal and they betray your trust, or they laugh at you, or have some other reaction, okay? But when they reciprocate, then we see this reciprocity start taking place, and this dance start to emerge, okay? And it's a really interesting thing, though, because like I said, people really differ in their ability to self-disclose to other people. And there are real benefits from self-disclosure, hey? And, you know, people differ just because it's normally distributed, so they differ in both genders. But also society kind of has pressure, unfortunately, on males not to self-disclose as much as females, okay? And that's really unfortunate when we look at the benefits. What are the benefits? Well, first off, there's increased mental health. So there's a strong correlation between the amount that you tend to self-disclose, or you are capable of, and your mental health, and your mental health stability. Okay? And also, there's a tendency to be liked more by others. This is a very strong research fact that they get over and over and over again. And not just for females. They predicted that maybe they would find that at first. No, it's true for males too. That even though there's a social norm not to self-disclose, that when males do, they tend to be liked more. Okay. So, you know, the gender differences are just that males tend to less, but the benefits to the males are just as strong. And of course, you know, this new generation, as we see the generations go on, tend to slough off more of these unnecessary social norms. And we see that generational effect, every generation becoming a little more open-minded. And so there, you know, Carl Rogers, you know, would say this is one of those social norms, you know, that is arbitrary, and one that, you know, you should discard and simply be true to yourself. Okay. Exceptions to the benefits. So normally this is certainly true. The more that you're capable of self-disclosing, the more mental health that you experience and more other people like you. But you can probably think of the exception to this, right? So one of them would be TMI, right? And actually, that is not following the reciprocity norm, though. So somebody who, you know, we've all had this where you meet somebody who tends to tell you their whole life story, when you're not reciprocating, right? They just keep going on and on and on, and they don't stop. So they're not waiting for those cues. They're not starting with something very much more subtle and then building naturally after they receive the cues of acceptance and trust, and also sharing back in that way. Okay. So there are two different exceptions here. One is before you get to know somebody very well, telling them something personal, because you usually wait till you get to know somebody at least a little, right? And two, without continuing to build that self-disclosure without waiting for reciprocity on the part of the other person. So believe me, those are not related to good mental health, and people do not tend to like you more if you engage in that TMI thing, right? All right. Let's look at disclosure here as a health buffer. And the big name here is Pennebaker. Jamie Pennebaker has done the most interesting and the most prolific work in this particular area of using self-disclosure and studying how it can function as a health buffer. Okay. So a buffer of health problems, you might say. And Pennebaker has done some interesting studies. I want you to be familiar with a couple of them. One that he did, and you don't need to memorize the year, but in 1984, what he did was he measured the extent to which those who lost their spouse had discussed this with friends. Okay? And he found a significant correlation between the extent they had discussed it with friends and health problems. Okay? And it was a negative correlation. So their health problems were down the more that they tended to disclose this with friends.